3, 2, 1, and here we are. Conversations with interesting people. Our guest today is somebody that I actually have not met before just a few minutes ago. And so I'm really honored today to have Jeff Capps. He is the executive director of the Iowa Children's Museum. You can see it right there on his shirt.
I did that just for you, just so if there was ever, a doubt.
Listen, I need all the help I can get. I had a full day of patience today, and so I've got some coffee going, and you're just hardcore to have nothing to drink as we're going, so good for you. I'm super excited to have you. I can't wait to hear all about your story and some of the things at the museum. My daughter, Mackenzie, who will be 4 in just over a month, is a huge fan. We go every single Tuesday. We've been members for a long time. And so including tomorrow, we always go there. She has her favorite pieces that are consistent. Then you guys have changed some things, and she loves that. And the playologists, which are you can explain what that is, have been really, really cool with her. They like to bring out the puppets. There was one named Genevieve, who was an Iowa student, and she would bring out the puppets, and Mackenzie just thought that was so amazing. So I'm so excited to meet you. Tell us all about you and kind of your background, and then you can get into the museum. Go.
Wow, that's a lot. So I guess the first thing I want to say is thanks for having me, and thank you for being so faithful as a partner with the museum. I remember when I got your email way back when, like 3 weeks ago, and we met
back when
virtually, and you said you came every Tuesday, and that it really kind of took me back because I've got 2 kids, and they're now 8 and almost 11, both girls. And we were fixtures there, and my wife was it was always what do you guys want to do? Museum. That was it. And so that was really one of my first experiences as an Iowan. So to kind of go back and hear you say that that's part of your weekly thing was really touched me. And so thanks for that, and thanks for thinking I'm an interesting person, which I really hope that I can be. So I guess that was the first thing. The second thing to say is I'm really used to being in the position that you're in and asking the questions. I was a broadcast journalism major.
Great.
So this is kind of a little bit challenging for me to be on the hot seat and thinking about answering questions and having a conversation and being an interesting person, because I like kind of evoking that from other people too. So better be careful. I might start asking you questions. I don't know.
We can do that too.
Yeah. So I'm an Iowa transplant, or I'm a non-native, I guess is what I would say. My wife is from Iowa City, so really once we started having kids, there was an opportunity to move back here to the Midwest for her, and she said something to the effect of, it might have been a little bit gentler than this, but you will apply for this job, which was not this job. I was with Habitat for Humanity, so I kind of came into the museum world through nonprofit management in the human services and affordable housing area with Habitat for Humanity. So started that work in Memphis, Tennessee, and then came for the job in Cedar Rapids, the one that I was told to apply for.
Right.
And I got it. It was after the flood in Cedar Rapids in 2008. So I started in the spring of 2009 and just kind of came into that environment where it was crazy, and we can probably talk about that a little bit more later maybe. But so that was kind of my entree to Iowa, is coming to run Habitat for Humanity in Cedar Rapids, which I'd started with Habitat in Memphis 5 years previous, so I at least had that background. But being new to the area, it was an exciting opportunity, but a lot of learning during that time. And so then I guess kind of go back to, I now have 2 girls, and they love the museum as kids. And so when this opportunity came about, it was the only thing that has managed to even make me think about for a second leaving Habitat for Humanity, because that was so near and dear to my heart. So when this opportunity came up, I said, this might be the thing that that might be my next thing. Maybe not, but I'm going to at least try. And so I applied, and one thing led to another, and I've been at the museum since January of this year. So still very new, but absolutely loving it. And I have a background as a high school teacher too. So I was a broadcast journalism major, as I kind of indicated earlier, at the University of Missouri. But I went back to my high school outside of Memphis and taught for 5 years. Was going to do it for 1 year and stayed for 5. And, so the opportunity to remain in nonprofit management at a place that was really special for my family, the Iowa Children's Museum, and kind of go back to that, my roots in education, just felt like a perfect opportunity. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you grew up in the Memphis area?
Actually, originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Moved around with my dad's job a little bit, but kind of Really, Memphis is kind of my adopted hometown. I've always kind of felt that way. So I was there from 6th grade through graduation from high school. And then went to the University of Missouri. Then Missouri was home for a while. And so moved around a bit, but then went back to Memphis. So I've spent a lot of years in Memphis, probably 15, 16 years of my life in Memphis.
So the formative years in Pennsylvania explain why you don't talk like you're from Memphis exactly.
Yes. And the broadcast journalism training too, they kind of beat
Sure.
that out of you a little bit. So yeah, but I'm a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of where I've been.
Yeah. And so what you went to Columbia Columbia, Missouri for broadcast journalism. What inspired you to kind of get into that, and then what then made you? Because did you go with the idea of being an on-air personality, or did you always think you'd be a teacher and then you went into education? Like, how did that come about?
The education thing was totally accidental.
Okay.
But the program that I went through in high school was an intensive performing arts program. So it was theater and film and television, really great program, public school, but just this really unique program. And so that really got me excited about video production and about being on air and reporting and anchoring and all those things. So I just kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I fell into that in high school. After I gave up my dreams of being a professional baseball player, I realized that maybe I needed to do something else. So kind of stumbled into theater and television production and all those things. So yeah, I thought that I wanted to be a sportscaster is actually what I thought I wanted to do, to take that love of sports, and then it kind of turned to news, kind of moved away from the sports thing, and was interested in news, and then decided that when there was an opportunity to go back to my high school, my teacher and director in that program, he had kind of a tradition of hiring students that had been with him as, to come in and be young teachers for a year and just, help him fill a role. And of course, he knew that they, came back knowing the program and that they're, 22 years old, they could kind of come in and just, work the crazy hours. And so he took advantage of that, and we were happy to do it. And so I was the first one who stayed more than a year, though. Most of them came and they then went on to do something else. Probably the most famous one to do that is Chris Parnell, who was on Saturday Night Live for several years and still shows up in different productions and different movies. He did it for a year, actually, when I was a high school student, and then went on and did SNL and some other things. But that did not happen to me. I stayed for 5 years and, in the trenches and helped shape young minds. And so I didn't know that I wanted to be an educator, but that was something that just kind of happened by accident.
That's kind of neat, though, that you had an experience with somebody who then went on to become a well-known professional performer.
For sure.
I always joke with kids in my office. I ask every young person in my office a number of questions. One of them is, what do you think you want to be when you grow up? And, a lot of them will say they want to be professional athletes, or they want to be actors, or they want to be something like that. And I always say to them, just remember, when you grow up, if you can get me Bears tickets or something like that I was nice to you when you were a kid. The parents always scoff when I say that. And so, but I always say this, somebody knew all the people in the NFL and the NBA and on Broadway when they were children.
Before they were somebody. That's right.
So, I figure I'm hedging my bets with that.
Yes.
Because I have a background in theater. I did pretty well in theater when I went to New York as a young man. So, not to the level of being on SNL or anything, but it never hurts. And so you knew a guy that was on SNL, and this is why I like things like this, why a show like this evolves, because you meet people that know people, and you get kind of interesting stories. So then you were teaching drama, or what were you teaching?
I was teaching Introduction to Film and Video, and this is in the late 90s through like 2002, 2003 school year. And so our program was really unique in that it was really a 4-year curriculum in a public high school. So you had kids, so my first year, I'm 22 years old, and looked like I was 16, and I'm teaching kids somewhere in the shirt and tie every day just to make sure that I don't get confused as a student, which did happen. It's a whole nother story. And so I'm teaching a range of students in that intro class because they're able to get their fine arts credit. So you've got kids that waited until their senior year. They didn't want to take choir. They didn't want to take visual art, whatever the case might be. And so they end up in my class. So I've got kids that are like 18, 19 years old trying to just get that fine arts credit. And then I have the 14, 15-year-old who's just psyched to be able to take something, like this in high school. And so some of those kids then went on to take our upper level production classes and go all the way through and run our TV studio. We ran the cable TV station for our community. And so they had this incredible experience if they were able to take advantage of that all the way through. And it was an intensive program, and of course,
Right.
as you can imagine, the same kids who were doing all the TV productions in the morning news show, and they're also doing theater at night, and running lights and sound for that, or on stage, or whatever the case might be. And so so I was teaching as a part of a team of teachers too in those higher level classes. So my core class was Intro to Film and Video, where we did the history of film, starting way back at the very earliest stages of that. And then in the second semester, they were actually producing shows like this.
Nice.
And so a really neat experience there for them. So that was really rewarding work, especially as a young person straight out of school.
Right.
And to see that program through another lens and be able to help them in that way was really super cool. So it was definitely a young person's job, though, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So I was there like kind of in my mid-20s, and it was great, and just great friendships. One of my best friends, still to this day, we taught in classrooms next door to each other, and ended up playing music together, and just had this very close bond. So.
And that was in the late 90s and early 2000s?
Yes, yeah. So it was an interesting time when you think about kind of the evolution of digital
Right.
video and the internet and just how we get our content. It was crazy. So we were doing nonlinear digital editing at that point, but it was still very new. So we were teaching kids the old school way, kind of tape to tape and A/B roll and all those techniques, but then also teaching them how to edit on a nonlinear digital editing system as well. So pretty cool stuff. Am I speaking your language?
I assume you know what that means, because it was where you went with that was what I was thinking, which is, so I graduated from high school in the late 90s, and then I was thinking about how young he is, and about how, the first email address I ever got was assigned to me as a freshman at Drake in 1998. Something like that.
Yep.
And then the internet was around. I remember playing with it in high school, the really slow dial-up. But then I was thinking about the first time I ever heard of YouTube would have been in the mid, what do we call it, the zeros? The aughts,
Yep.
And so that, you were right in that time frame when the internet was like going to have this nuclear explosion of then, I mean, what a time to be, like you say, you went from the tapes to right into just catapulted into the digital age.
For sure. And even if if I go back to my college career, so I was at Mizzou from 94 to 98. And one of the things I love about Mizzou is just the foundation that you get. So you don't go into a journalism class, even if you know that's what you want to do, you don't get into the journalism school until officially until your junior year. And you can take some classes your sophomore year, but they want to make sure you get that good, strong, liberal arts base. And then, take news writing and history of journalism and communications. And so that really strong base. But by 98, and I'm in broadcast, so I'm doing radio and TV. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I want to do. One of those two. And they're like, oh, and by the way, you have to produce a web story, this semester. And I'm like, thought my head was going to explode, and HTML and all this, And I remember laboring over that. So I took a news story that I'd done for TV, for KOMU TV, which is the NBC affiliate in Columbia. And they said, okay, now you have to put it online. And and nowadays, of course, that would just be,
Sure, click.
Yes, and every student is doing that. They're producing their story in 3 different formats, and they're putting it online before they leave the studio at night. And it's now multimedia journalists. It's not, a television journalist, or, it's, you do it all. And so transition was already happening, but it was a really exciting time to be then fast forwarding to when I was teaching, to be teaching that. And really, we insisted, though, of course, like in the film classes, we insisted they'd still shot on Super 8 or 8mm film, and they spliced and, taped and cemented or whatever and put their films together. And most of them were really rough, as you can imagine, but we kind of insisted on.
Still cool, though.
Yeah, it was aesthetically it's cool, and it really gives you a sense. And you think about linear editing of videotape, you really have to think through, how do we put this thing together? It's not just dragging whatever. So I mean, there is that kind of, and not that that's not a great way to do it, because it's revolutionized the industry and what people can do in terms of producing content, but we felt like it was important, to make sure that they knew how to do that. So it was an exciting time, but there was also that sense of like the internet and what that meant in our lives that I don't think any
Right.
of us really knew. So in that early era,
How
and
could we have?
right, and so all of a sudden, this is a little bit of a funny story, and I won't name any names because some of my students, who knows, they might end up watching this show.
I hope they do, and subscribe.
Exactly, there you go. Yeah, good plug there. So they were doing film reports every 6 weeks. We had 6-week grading periods, and they had to do a film report. And it was pretty obvious when you knew a kid maybe was using words that were not his or her own. And so I learned really early on that I could just put it in Google or Yahoo or whatever the search engine was at the time, and there it was. And we're just finding these like huge chunks of text. So I think it's really interesting, and that's still happening, obviously. And it's upsetting to know that continues. But kids have always found ways to get around things, and we've all been there. But it was really interesting to just see that kind of evolve. And I was like, I'd be way behind now if I tried to bust a kid doing something like that. But at that time, it was like, whew. And you hated delivering that news, but
that technology's gotten better on the other side as well. So I got busted for cheating in my ethics class.
Cheating in ethics.
Wow.
Hey,
that's rich.
It's if it swings too far, you should almost get an A for that. Like if you go too far out there.
I just hated the concept of secondary education, and I thought the class was stupid, and the professor was some weird guy with a weird beard that didn't make any sense. And I was like,
Sure.
You know what, this is a waste of my time. I'm gonna go learn something valuable on my own.
Yeah.
Besides sitting here and listening to this guy talk to me about the ancient Greek ethics and philosophy. Not that it's
all
not
the stuff
important.
that I enjoy reading, right?
Well, I was broke at the time and worried about trying to make money, so that's still
Sure.
the focus.
Cooper Hopkins is against weird guys with weird beards. I'm
not against them.
Let the world know that.
I don't want to pay to have them tell me to go home and read 40 pages a night.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's that's actually a whole other topic that we could get into, given that you're in the education field still. It's just it's a little bit different. At this point, my mother will disown me if I don't mention that in the 60s she went to the University of Missouri to go to the journalism school, and my mother was trained as a journalist, and
Very cool.
she was the editor of the Missourian or whatever
Absolutely.
it was, and she has all kinds of great stories about going to Mizzou, and she's gonna kill me. She was the TA of Mark Twain. She was the RA of Mark Twain,
Hall,
which
sure.
which I guess I don't know if it still is, but it was a dorm at the time.
Yes.
And so,
Still there when I was there in the 90s.
I have heard, not to spend the whole time talking about my mom, but what I think is interesting is that I think, because we're all from the Midwest, which we can count Pennsylvania as the Midwest, although, when I spent time in New Jersey, the people
He's not a geographer.
The people in Pittsburgh thought of themselves as East Coast, but then no one east of them thought they were East Coast. But Cooper and I are from Iowa. I think it's neat when a school that you wouldn't think of is the top of something, right? So Missouri has been the top of journalism as long as I've ever paid attention, because my mom was talking about it back from the 60s, and they still are very highly ranked. The University of Iowa, Iowa State, have some programs that are considered to be top of the nation, or at least in the top couple. Whereas if it was Harvard or Yale or, Berkeley, you might be like, well, of course, it's Dartmouth. Of course, they're the top of whatever. But I think it's cool that Missouri has such a great program.
Yeah, and it's really recognized, I believe, as the very first journalism school. So that wasn't always a thing. So when you look at it from that context, it's really cool. And it was a great place to go to school. And certainly that program was very intensive. But I'm so thankful for, as I talked about earlier, that basis and that understanding that having a solid foundation, you don't just need to jump in and suddenly think that you can be a journalist, that it's important to be a well-rounded scholar first and a well-rounded person before you start thinking that you can go out and somehow report the news.
Right.
And so I really valued that. My wife was actually in the editorial side of things and the graphic design, magazine journalism, and so we have that in common. It was a really neat place to be.
You said she's from the Iowa City area.
She is.
So then
yes.
she went to Missouri because the journalism school is great, and she was there for that program.
Yeah, and that's how we ended up meeting. Not necessarily through the program, but we were both kind of running on parallel paths in that program. So it was really cool. And even though I didn't end up, I kind of did go into the field because I went back and started teaching it, and then I did for 3 years. I hosted a news magazine, a half-hour news magazine for the school system that I was teaching in, and really worked with students in that way as well on that show. And again, kind of got to do the whole gamut. So I was on air and wrote and did some editing and all the producing, obviously, and lining up guests and all that stuff. So I really did get to use those skills. But I think I've found that the solid basis I got there has really prepared me too for being in the nonprofit field now for 15 years. So it was a great place to be, and it is really neat when you think about. There's obviously a lot of, Northwestern has a great journalism program, and there are a bunch of them throughout the country. But I think Missouri has managed to remain very, very highly respected, and I think has done a good job, from what I can tell, staying on top of the trends too, and recognizing that students have to have that well-rounded, especially in this day and age where newspapers are dying and TV stations are struggling to continue selling advertising that keeps them doing good journalism and all of those things. So it's definitely not a field for the faint of heart. I mean, it's intense, and especially when you're as a young journalist going out and going into a town that you don't know and just trying to make it and get a good tape together. I don't know if they still call it a tape. They did in my day. They called it a tape. I got my tape.
I almost feel like myself as a content creator has a better shot at journalism than an actual journalist might, because of how important it is. The content creation side of things is.
I don't think there's any question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you look at.
I could put I could put well thought out, executed videos up on YouTube and get those submitted to all sorts of places, and ask questions with the microphone and read a few journalism books a lot better than somebody who went and focused on the journalism side of things. They're almost set so far back, because then it's like, okay, well, how do I produce what I'm trying to write about, what I'm trying to get out there?
Yeah. Do you know who Tim Pool is?
I don't.
So he nodded yes, and one of the reasons is that I know that Cooper and I are both fans of Joe Rogan's show. Tim Pool is, so I think his Instagram, shout out to Tim Pool, I think his Instagram, his Twitter is at TimCast, but he's a journalist, and he's been on Joe Rogan's program a couple times. He was a guest by himself, and then a few weeks later he was on when they had on Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and then Vidya, who was their head of security or whatever she was on. And so I started following him on Twitter. He's more conservative than I am, I would say, but I think he at least says in his writings and in his podcast that he became a journalist just by making YouTube videos of him doing commentary on the news, and his page exploded after a while, and he got his following that way. It's an interesting conversation. This is what I told you before we recorded.
Yeah.
We don't know where a conversation is going to go, but media today and news today is so different. Everybody has a phone with 4K cameras and decent audio. Yeah. You can upload to YouTube. We live in a world that my mother will never come on a show like this, but I would love to get her commentary because, my mother will talk about journalism radically changed after Watergate. Before Watergate, she would tell you it was, we report the news, we don't make the news. She'll talk about Cronkite and Baba Wawa and going around and doing where we just report the news. But then after that, it became, how can we break the story? How can we get you? How can we have this thing? And obviously we have a president that talks a lot about fake news.
Right.
And then to give credit to the right, so they don't just think I'm bashing on the right, some of the stories from some of the major news outlets have come out that the sources were bad and they were rushing to press. And when you have a 24-hour news cycle where it's no longer the news is at 7 and the paper comes out in the morning, you have to fill 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In a way, that kind of backroom journalism or the smart people commentating has become a really relevant voice in 2019 and soon to be 2020 politics and one of the jokes, and then I want to hear what you guys have to say. One of the jokes I've heard comedians say is, they used to begin the evening news by saying, do you know what happened today? Or do you know what's happening in the world today? Yeah, because we got it from Facebook and Twitter and Instagram immediately after it happened. It's a whole new landscape, even than when you train, and you and I are almost the same age.
For sure. Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think that's fuzzy math, but thank you. It is. It's so stratified, in terms of how what's available and the competition, and it's overwhelming, quite frankly. I mean, I struggle. I'm 43 years old, and sometimes I feel like I'm 83 because I feel like I'm so slow and so behind. But it's exhausting too, and I resisted. I still resist to a great degree. I'm really going to sound very curmudgeonly here, but just being on Facebook because I knew that I didn't have enough bandwidth. I knew.
Resisting.
What's that?
Keep resisting.
Yeah, I mean, I just knew that I knew that I had the capacity or the potential to get sucked into it in a way that I knew would not be good from a productivity standpoint and from doing things that I really cared about doing, which would really be, number one, staying in deeper relationship with a handful of people than trying to rekindle friendships with people from 30 years ago.
Have you seen The Great Hack?
I have not.
You should talk to him about that.
So, oh wow, to try to even explain this. So, do you subscribe to Netflix?
Yes.
So you should watch The Great Hack. Cooper recommended it to me. I'm going to give him credit, so it doesn't just sound like it's me pulling this out. But it talks about this multimedia company that basically drew all this Facebook data out and was doing really shady things with the election in 2016 and the Brexit vote, and $1 million a day at least on Facebook with ads that were misleading people, taking people down different rabbit holes. People that are angry are more likely to engage and keep reading, so just forming these fake groups that were just ridiculous, but they would draw people down into it. And I mean, I'm doing a terrible job because, of course, it's a however many hour documentary that's so specific. I can't even remember the name of the company, but
Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And it's definitely worth your time if you're a fan of documentary film.
Sure.
And since had these media type interests, definitely worth your time to look at, just sort of, because even though I guess that it really blew my mind, because if you would have told me it was a fake movie, it was a fictional movie, like Lord of the Rings or something like that, I would have said, wow, that was a great movie. Like, those people are super creative that they thought of all that. The fact that it's a documentary is terrifying.
Sure.
Because you watch it and you think to yourself, that actually happened. Like, it actually... And then they got in trouble for it, and you see kind of, some of the players in it that got in trouble, and one tried to blow the whistle, and she kind of had to run for her life a little bit. Anyway, well worth your time.
The more you describe it, and I definitely remember the Cambridge Analytica. So it's crazy. I mean, it's a crazy time to be a part of all that.
Let's back up just for a second, because I want to move us towards the museum.
Sure.
But one of the things so we did have a question from an Instagram viewer that I think goes into kind of what we were talking about having this sort of this liberal arts base. I've always thought that, a good writer, a good journalist is a good reader. I think there has to be a level of, I don't know how to say this, like a level of education to kind of meet the rest of the populace. Like, I'll give you my favorite example. I don't think you can call yourself, that's not fair. It's hard for me to think that you can be an educated person and not have read a little bit of Shakespeare.
Sure.
Right? I mean, because in the Western world. And so you mentioned like that liberal arts, sort of foundation before you were able to specialize in journalism. Our Instagram viewer asked, we seem to be moving, because there's so much noise trying to get our attention nowadays. We've just been talking about that. What's your opinion of the need for broader education? How is the education system doing, in your opinion, in America right now? Like, what are your thoughts on any of that? I feel like I know about some of it, but like I still don't really understand Snapchat. I don't have it. I don't ever use it. I understand it goes away, and Cooper told me that drug dealers use it because it goes away. TikTok I've only heard of, but the thing is, the minute this is why formal education is irrelevant. By the time you write your lectures to lecture the class, first of all, they know more than you do. You know, they know how to swipe left or right when old people like you and me probably don't know how to do that. Maybe you do. I don't very much. But then like the new thing's already out. They already know it's already irrelevant by the time you put out a show about it. I mean, unless you can do it the minute it comes out, you know, it's going to be irrelevant already. You know, and what made me think about the thing you said. It's funny you said Jordan Shapiro. Two of my favorite people are Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. When you said that, I was like, wow, is he conflating the two? But
highly possible that I could have done that. Thankfully, I didn't.
But you know, Cooper. But one of the things is that what you just said has been the argument against how we teach sex ed in America since you and I were kids.
Sure.
Which is no one's comfortable talking about it. They kind of briefly mention it or rely on the teachers, and you know, that one day a year when you would go into the other room and get the pink or the blue pamphlet, or the church to teach us. And then, you know, and what we found, I remember I heard a fascinating lecture when I was in medical school by a woman who was really involved in things like domestic violence and teen sexual behavior, and she had all this data about kids are getting the majority of their sex ed from porn. Which, of course, you know, and so then there were all these things that were perpetuated kind of amongst the youth that we don't have to talk about because, again, the people watching may be children's museum people, but like but again, a very interesting conversation in this lecture, which is things that we all might imagine that if that were your primary education, you would be misled about a number of things when it comes to human sexuality if your primary encounter was pornography.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so again, we wouldn't just mention it to our kids in passing, oh, the birds and the bees and whatever, and now just that's the end of it.
Go figure it out.
Right. Well, and if you do, you get teen pregnancy rates and STDs and so forth because I like that. I'm gonna look into that guy further and just see about reading some of his stuff because that's it's a cool concept.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Yeah, a great conference for me to be at early in my tenure with the Children's Museum, just to be, you know, thinking about those things. And there was a lot of conversation at that conference just about the role of technology in children's museums, for example. And there was one very interesting presenter from one of the children's museums in the San Francisco area. And they, of course, had access to unlimited dollars and Silicon Valley money that they wanted to pour into education and great opportunities. And in the early, mid, late 90s, just tons of screens and all this interactive, high-tech stuff. And she said, now we're kind of going back and we're trying to take all those screens out because it becomes obsolete. To your point, Adam, it becomes obsolete so fast.
Right.
And kind of a different way of looking at it. But they said what we're trying to do now is kind of hide all that stuff. So we still want the technology, but we want it to be so seamless and so artistic and so just immersive that you don't know that it's there. And I think that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about the role of technology in our lives too. You know, that all the things that are automated and all the things that are under the surface there, but we get pretty bogged down in all the stuff that is right there in our faces. You know, so their role was to try to figure out how to.
That is a beautiful segue into the Iowa Children's Museum, and I was thinking when you were saying that about the different ways that people interact with learning at your museum, because as I said, I've gone a lot of times. And I think that there are many different modalities there. Tell us a little bit about the history of the museum, and then rather than me talk about the things that my daughter likes there and that we interact with, tell us like about some of the things you guys are doing and featuring, and even to that point, like how do you guys interact with play and learning and all that?
Sure.
Tell us all about your museum.
Gosh, there's a lot there. I remember, I'll share a little anecdote first. So when I first announced that I was leaving Habitat to go to the Iowa Children's Museum, I had, first of all, it was completely unexpected for the people who I knew and was close to in Cedar Rapids, who had worked with very passionately with Habitat. And they're like, oh, you know, they were upset first of all, but then they were like, why? And I'm like, it's just, you've got to see this place. There's just something so special about it, and obviously near and dear to my heart because my kids go in there, much like yours, Adam. But one individual said, "What does what does that mean? It's like like artwork made by kids or for kids or whatever." And
kids in cages that you go around and look at.
I guess I don't know.
Stuffed children throughout the years.
But I get it. Well, I didn't go there, but that's an interesting. But it is an interesting thing to think about. Like, how do you explain to somebody who has never been to a children's museum what it is? But really, the children's museum, I think the Boston Children's Museum claims to be like 100 years old, and kind of the original one. So this concept of creating a space for kids to thrive and explore. We say imagine, create, discover, and explore is kind of our tagline. And we talk about the power of play and all these things. This is not a new concept, and there have been children's museums for decades in our country. And obviously, I think if you look at the kind of trend line, there are many more in probably the past 30 years. Our museum is just over 20 years old.
Okay.
So it's definitely become something, I'd say, in the past 20 to 30 years where you've seen a real proliferation of the number of museums that are out there. But really the concept of a children's museum, and they're all over the map in terms of how they function and what their exhibits are like, what age demographic that they aim for. But really the idea is back to that notion of informal learning, that this is a place for kids to, as we say, imagine, create, discover, and explore, and really put those concepts that maybe they're learning in early childhood education and then the elementary years, that they can come into our space and they can play and learn while they play. And so we've been around just over 20 years, like I said. Started our first actual exhibit was in the old Sycamore Mall in Iowa City, which is now the Iowa City Marketplace. And so it was a temporary, I think, traveling exhibit that the founders of the museum, who were two young ladies in the area, and they were just passionate about this concept of children's museums and had been to some of them growing up. Their parents had taken them to them. And it was really their idea to launch this thing in the Iowa City area. And then when the Coral Ridge Mall came online in 1998, they took their concept and said, we've got a little bit of experience under our belts and we want to make this thing bigger and better. And they talked the Coral Ridge Mall property owners. At that time, I think it was General Growth Properties. It's now Brookfield Properties. But they made a trip to Chicago and they said, they pitched their idea and they said, we need space. We need you to partner with us. There's obviously a lot more involved in that than that. But they eventually agreed and gave them the opportunity to completely retrofit this space to make it a unique space for a children's museum. And the one stipulation, as I understand it, is that they would open the museum within a year of the Coral Ridge Mall opening. So Sure enough, in November 16th of 1999, the museum opened in the mall. So we'll celebrate our 20th anniversary in the mall this November 16th, which happens to be a Saturday. So for all of your viewers and listeners out there, we'll have a free admission day on Saturday, November 16th, where everybody can come experience it. And so, and it's just grown from there. So it wasn't like on day one, all the exhibits as you see them with your daughter, Adam, it was all completely fully realized. It took time.
Sure.
So a lot of those exhibits have been there in some form since day one, but there were big empty spaces too that just, when the funding came through and when they were able to garner the support to build it out, and it's just evolved over the years into what it is now, which is this informal learning laboratory for kids. We say birth to age 12. Okay. Birth is kind of tough. It's tough to have a newborn in our space, but I think the idea by saying birth to 12 is you've got your daughter who's 4, right?
To be 4 soon, yeah.
So maybe you've got another child that comes along with your daughter. They can at least experience that environment and be there with the family. And a lot of it is about those family relationships and the social aspect that comes with being in that environment that is immersive and nurturing, and everything has a purpose. I remember one of the first tours that I took with our assistant director, Amy, who's been there for many, many years, and just does a tremendous job at the museum. And I thought I understood the museum pretty well. I've been there with my kids, but this was very early in my tenure as the director. And we were going around and she was leading a tour, and I was just kind of listening to hear all the things that I could steal from her presentation. And we were at the pizzeria, which I'm sure you know well, Adam.
I do.
And my kids love that. That was one of their favorite things, probably still is, and they're 8 and almost 11. And she said, this is a great exhibit, and we focus on equal shares and all these different concepts. She's talking about fractions. We were thinking about the pizza and how, and I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it right now, but she went into this whole litany of things. I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing a lot with this simple.
I would never
simple
thought of that.
exhibit here.
I've been there 100 times. That you're right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. I wouldn't have thought of that.
And of course, to go back to your what do we call them, the great.
At one point, but any place where drop me an email. It's down in the description box below.
Good to hear. So I forget where I was going with that, but
you're talking about how the pizzeria was.
Thinking about customer service and just about you having the wherewithal as a teenager or as a young adult walking into these places and saying, I want to speak to the manager or whatever. So they're learning that too. Obviously, those social skills that go along with being in the pizzeria and maybe bringing people. So there is that pretend, play aspect. That's all that, but you really get down to the learning initiatives and the math. STEM is one of our big learning initiatives. So thinking about all the different things, how many different directions can you go with that in that simple exhibit in the pizzeria? How many different things? And like I said, I'm doing a bad job of explaining it, but really cool to think about how many different ways that we're touching kids in that environment with all those learning concepts.
STEM is a big thing right now, and you sort of see that pop up. Just in case anybody doesn't know what that means, tell us what STEM means, and then give us some examples within the museum of how you see STEM coming into play.
Happy to. So science, technology, engineering, and math. And really the idea with STEM is it's this holistic thing. So if we're doing a STEM family night, which we do the last Friday of the month, which is again a free opportunity at the mall to come to the museum 5 to 8 the last Friday of the month. So another little plug for some of the good stuff we're doing with accessibility at the museum. The idea is if you have a STEM challenge, it's not, okay, so tonight's going to be a technology challenge. It's how do we present a challenge in this
So for those of you watching and listening, we apologize. We had a little bit of a technical issue. We just found out that we lost 5 or 10 minutes of the last bit of the conversation. So we're going to try to pick up as best we can and do a little bit of a rough edit here in the last 20 minutes or so. But I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff. He was talking about, kind of nonprofits and some of the budget pieces and how the revenue is made that goes into running an organization like the Iowa Children's Museum. So I'm not sure where we left off, but just kind of go back to, if we're thinking 5-10 minutes, it was maybe what was the budget and how was the revenue made and all that. So go ahead, Jeff.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the number one thing that I come back to with a nonprofit is, we exist to make the community a better place and a stronger place. And that's why that work has resonated with me over the years that I've done it. So when you look at a lot of people say, well, nonprofit, what the heck does that mean? That's what it means to me. And the dollars that we generate, we're putting back into our programs to make them stronger and hopefully serve more people. And so I think the Children's Museum, we're very fortunate that a strong organization has been built over the years. We've had great leadership from the board level and at the staff level, such that we're healthy financially, but we're always evaluating that. What can we do to be even more financially stable and so that we can serve more. So our model is such that we rely, as many nonprofit organizations do, on a mix of earned revenue and contributed revenue. So on the earned revenue side, we're going to be talking about admissions, memberships, field trips, birthday parties, facility rentals, those kinds of things that we go out and we earn that business, and we have to run like a business too. I think that's the other misconception about nonprofits is, it's just kind of, it's all very feel good and mission based, and it is at its best. But we've got to run like a business too, and we've got to be smart. We get an audit every year, and all those things that make us, I think, a very good organization. And so we'll be at somewhere between typically 50, 55, 60% of earned revenue of our total budget of just under $2 million. I think this current fiscal year we're at about 1.8 million. And so then the other 40% or 45% or whatever it ends up being in any given year has to be earned through contributed revenue.
Sure.
So that's going to be like any other nonprofit. It's going to be individual gifts, grants, sponsorships, special events, you name it. And so we work really hard for all of those dollars, you know, and they're all important. And I think that community investment piece, when you look at the contributed revenue, yeah, special events are very intensive, but if you look at them only as revenue generators, you're missing some of the point, which is people use this in the nonprofit world in kind of a trite way, friend raising, but there's some validity in that. You know, what are we doing to do things out in the community that really even help bolster our mailing list a little bit, you know, and how do we connect with people? How do we keep people engaged? And sometimes you might get to them through a golf tournament or through a trivia night or through a gala that maybe they come to with their friend who is a committee member. You know, so all of those things are critically important. And I'll be honest in saying it's hard to keep all those balls in the air as a small or mid-sized nonprofit. You know, usually you have, like us, we have a fund development staff of one, you know, and a marketing professional that's supporting that work. And obviously I'm helping raise funds as well. I view myself as the chief fundraiser as well. But it's hard in the midst of dealing with the day-to-day to keep your eye on all of those things.
What kind of how do you guys market yourself? What does the Children's Museum do to get themselves out to people?
Another great question, Cooper. I mean, I feel like we talked about the exhibits thing earlier, and it's like I'm still learning all these things. One revelation that I had recently, and I'll kind of try to answer your question more directly, is we're a pretty dynamic organization in that, you know, we are working to attract families like Adams, you know, to come be members and come play at our place. So there's definitely that notion that we're an attraction, both locally and regionally as well. You know, we don't have a children's museum like ours within an hour or so of here, you know, so we really have a tremendous opportunity to capture even more, the attention of even more people. So we have to market ourselves as an attraction. So, you know, and I'm learning a lot about this, you know, in terms of working with the Think Iowa City, the Convention and Visitors Bureau here in the area, working with the tourism associations and all of those folks to market ourselves as an attraction. But then there's also the component of, like any other nonprofit, we're out there trying to tout the value of what we're doing for the community. And so, you know, how do we really promote ourselves from an educational standpoint and from a lifelong learning standpoint and a family development standpoint and being good for the community and the schools and all those things. So a lot of different things that we're doing in that regard. And then we're doing a lot of different events. Like, how do we market ourselves in terms of all these cool things that we're doing on any given day, any given week. So so the answer is, in terms of what we're doing, it's a lot of different things in a lot of different spaces, you know.
As is most marketing.
Right.
It has to be, multimodal.
And we'll do the best we can with the clips and with the longer part of this program to get the word out from our end and our marketing people. We will be sure that we have the website linked below in the description box, both in the audio and definitely with the YouTube show, to make sure anybody that wants to, you know, can find the hours. I'm sure you guys have a donate button that they can use with that. You know, and it's one of those things that as time goes along, you know, we might even get Cooper to come out when Mackenzie and I are there and you know, do a little filming, and we can show people off. You know, we don't want to film anyone that doesn't want to be, obviously, but you know, to help promote, because it really is kind of a neat space. And you know, the thing that I think you mentioned as well is, you know, there are multiple free events that happen, so that way the cost of admission doesn't wind up being prohibitive to anybody, really, if they time it right.
That's absolutely right, and I'm really proud of that fact that we made that an emphasis, and I think that is critically important. It's one of the things that drew me to the job. You know, I knew that had to be part of what I was doing, especially given what I was doing before in terms of affordable housing. So I think we do a good job of that, and we just continue to hear from families that it's making a difference for them, you know. And just share a quick story if I can. So this was back during the polar vortex in January, those awful days, and I'm proud to say that we remained open because we wanted to be a safe, warm place for families to come. And there were businesses all over the area closing, and we said, no, we need to be here. And even if it's 8 or 10 families that pass through the museum on any given day, we, on those cold days, we need to be here. So this one particular day, I kind of ventured downstairs from my office and I discovered a family playing in the Science of Skateboarding room, and it was a mom and I forget 4 or 5 kids, but they ranged from a newborn up to like probably a 13 or 14-year-old, and they were all having a good time and playing. And she said, I want to introduce you to my son. And he came over, and she said that he had a variety of challenges. And she said, we're really glad to be here today. And I said, I'm glad you're here too. And he came up and he said, will you come play with me? I said, well, yeah. So I went over and started playing with him, and then I ended up in conversation with the mom again, and she said, she kind of teared up a little bit. She said, this is his place. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, he's 10 years old, and you can, I kind of shared with you, you can kind of see he's got a variety of challenges. And, there's a lot of cool things to do in this area, and there's the trampoline parks and all this different stuff. She said, but this is a place where he can thrive, where he is safe, he feels comfortable, and it's his place. She just kept saying that. And she said, I didn't think we were going to be able to come to the museum because funds are tight. And she said we came a couple times, and it was clear that it was going to be hard for us to do it on a consistent basis. And she said it broke my heart because I knew how much in particular he was benefiting from it. And she said just very recently, she said she opened her mailbox and she had a letter from the Iowa Children's Museum. She didn't know what it was, opens it up, and it's ICM for everyone. And she said, I didn't know what that meant. She said, but I filled out the form and I brought it here today, and they said, congratulations, you have a free membership for a year.
Cool.
And the tears started flowing. Of course, I got a little misty-eyed too. And she said, I just can't begin to tell you how much this means to me. And again, that sounds like I'm propping us up. It's really about our partners that make that possible, because we've got grants and we've got sponsors that help us do that. And then we've got these partner agencies that make referrals. So she was referred by another agency that she was working with that said, we work with the Iowa Children's Museum and we think this would be great for you. And, again, she didn't know that until she opened this letter and brought it in. So just really cool stuff.
One of the things I think is an interesting topic that I'm not sure we have time to delve into as much as I would love to, but I'm really interested in. Mostly it began in my psychiatry training, but now with a kid of my own, is I'm not sure at what age prejudice becomes a thing. Because your museum is such a melting pot, and when I go there, I'm always happily surprised by the fact that, yes, there are waspy Iowa families that look like mine, but there is a Hasidic Jewish family that I see there all the time. And they have a variety of ages of children, and they've got, the earlocks, and they're all wearing yarmulkes, and the father has, I don't know what it's called, sorry everybody, but he has the thing with the little four points of fabric hanging off, and then right next to him there are Muslim families where the women are wearing hijab, and all the kids are playing. And I've noticed that my 4-year-old has no concept of race or creed or religion. Like, play is their language. Yes. And she couldn't possibly care less what color they are, what clothes they're wearing. If they want to play with the dolls, assuming they don't take it away from her, because then she's gonna get territorial. But I mean, assuming that they're, I think you called it Coralville Cove at the end, where you can run up the thing up the stairs, and she couldn't possibly care less. And I look at that and I think to myself, we find ourselves in a world where on both sides, the far left is ridiculous, the far right is ridiculous, with prejudices on both sides. But when I look at these kids play in a safe space like yours, they're not arguing over whose holy book is correct or what color is right or left. It's, hey, let's make a pizza, or let's bang on the drum things in the music room. I mean, so I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I'm not asking a philosophical conversation about at what age do we, but hate is not a family value. To pull a meme and a bumper sticker out, I'm continually struck when I watch my own daughter, and in a space like yours, it has to be welcoming to all creeds and colors and so forth. I'm sure it's one of your formal things, but it must be, because whenever I'm there, it is that. It is a melting pot, even in Iowa, where I think if anyone's listening who's not from Iowa, you're probably thinking, oh yeah,
Right.
everybody looks like Adam, right? Blonde hair, blue, whatever. No. And it couldn't possibly be more obvious than in the halls of the Iowa Children's Museum.
I appreciate you saying that. And we certainly hope it's that. I commented the other day, I was talking to a group and I said, I feel like the last Friday of the month that we have our STEM family free night, that 5 to 8 p.m. at the Iowa Children's Museum at the mall, I feel like it is probably the most diverse place, maybe in the state, maybe in the region, and that makes me very happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I love hearing the anecdotes that you're sharing, that even on a special night where we have that, hopefully that big embrace where we're welcoming everybody in, no matter what their socioeconomic status is or what their background is, that's happening on a consistent basis too. And I think we've got some things in place that help encourage that. But it's a fair, and it's also an unsettling question to confront, to say, when and how does that happen? And why do we continue to struggle with some of those same things? And I hope that we're one part of the answer to that, is in the venue that we're providing.
One of the beauties of your location is foot traffic for other reasons. So
Right.
you come to the ice skating rink, you go to the movies, you go to the mall, you're right by the food court. As retail, and maybe you've seen it already, I know you've been there 8 months, but if you looked back if you talked to your marketing director who's been there for years and years and years, as more and more stores have gone out of the mall, including the Gap, which I didn't think any Gaps closed anywhere for any reason, but as online shopping, and I'm guilty of this, I do most of my shopping online, as foot traffic would get less and less, is that a concern at all for walk-in customers, or do you think people are being drawn there for the museum and it's not as big of an issue?
I think it's a very great reciprocal relationship for us to be in a place of commerce, right in a hub there. And I think we're very fortunate that our mall is relatively healthy compared to malls all over the country, and some not too far from here. So you look at the attractions that we have at the mall, I think that's it helps us, but I think we help them all too. And I think we're proud of that. I think we're a destination business, though. I think it's I don't know if mall traffic is down per se. I think there are stores constantly closing, but there's new stores opening up too. So I think it's just part of the retail environment, but it is a different environment than it was certainly 10, 15, 20 years ago. But we haven't seen, I wouldn't say that we've seen a huge drop off, but I do think if you look at our numbers, we've probably plateaued a little bit over the years. There's only so much you can, in a community of our size, there's probably only so much that you can continue to grow. For a lot of years, you look at our attendance numbers, and it really was a steady incline. So it's something that we're looking at, and I think something that, we have a great relationship with the mall, and we're always talking about, what can we do to enhance our relationship? What can we do to hopefully attract more visitors, and vice versa?
Yeah.
So but it's tough in this retail environment. It is tough.
So Jeff, just like every guest we've had to this point, you began by being so humble and aloof and being like, well, I don't know if I'm interesting and so forth. I think this has been a magnificent conversation. As we come up on 2 hours, there's a time vortex in here. I swear, the time goes by really quickly.
Everybody did go fast.
Everybody says that. I want to thank you for coming on. We always end by saying, this is conversations with interesting people, and so if you, the guest, have interesting people that you think would be great to have a platform like this, I want to hear all the names and contacts that you can think of. We can talk about it offline, but you've been fantastic, and to anybody listening, we absolutely want to hear from you all. If you have interesting people or other topics or other walks of life that you're hoping to hear from, drop us a comment, drop me an email below. We totally want to hear from all of you. I want to give you the microphone now. Tell us anything you want about the hours, promotions you have coming up, websites, social media. Where can people find more about you or the Children's Museum? The microphone is yours.
Boy, that's okay. I'll do my best. So I would say about the 2 hours or whatever we've been talking, thanks so much for making it easy. And it was fun and great talking to you guys. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And when I looked at the other show that you sent me, I was like, I might be interesting for 5 minutes. I don't know if I can be interesting for 120, but it was a fun conversation.
We could have you back. I have a feeling there's more here that we didn't
there's probably
even
more.
touch
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. So in terms of our hours, so we're at the Coral Ridge Mall, and as you well know, but been there for 20 years, not going anywhere. It's our home, and we are there generally 6 days a week during the school year. It's a little bit dicey because some Mondays we're open when schools are out. Some we're actually looking at kind of adjusting that a little bit potentially. But in general, we are open from 10 to 6, and that would be Tuesday through Thursday. And then on Fridays, we're open until 8 o'clock, which is great. And we usually have a member hour as well on Friday mornings from 9 to 10, so that's a special time. Saturdays 10 to 6, Sundays 11 to 6, and then generally closed on Mondays except during the summer and on school holidays. And then when we are open on Mondays, it's 10 to 6. So I'm sure everybody followed that perfectly, right? That was not difficult at all.
I'm sure it's all on the website too.
It is on the website, yes. And it even says when you open our website, it says we play today from 10 to 6 at the bottom of the screen. So that's a nice feature. Website is the ICM, as in the iowachildrensmuseum.org. Our two main social platforms would be Facebook and Instagram. So I think Facebook is FB, the Iowa Children's Museum, I believe. And then Instagram is IA Children's Museum, I believe. Otherwise, just Google it. We're out there.
We'll find all those things too and link them in the descriptions below. Definitely on YouTube and on the audio only versions as well, so people won't have to spend as much time, since we're all busy, and as we talked about, there's so many social channels, but we'll make sure they know how to find you too.
And we're always doing different special events. So we have a big event coming up around Halloween, Monster Mash, which is a really fun event. And then I think I talked about this earlier, but we're doing our big 20th anniversary celebration at the mall on Saturday, November 16th. Where we'll have all sorts of special activities, and it will be a free admission day for the community, 10 to 6 that day. So those are kind of some of the highlights that we have coming up. That is the day also that we expect to open our newly renovated City Money exhibit. So it'll be closed for about 4 weeks between mid-October and then that November 16th date. So we've got some exciting things coming up, and it's an exciting place to be. And even if you don't have kids, I would tell your viewers they should look me up. I would be happy to give somebody a tour, a personal tour, if they want to come check it out and just see. Because I think I talked about this earlier. I think for people that haven't been exposed to this concept of a children's museum, it's like, what the heck is this thing? So to be able to give them the opportunity to come and experience it as an adult, I think generally you just hear. I overheard a grandma. I assumed it was a grandma just based on the familial relationship, but this is several weeks ago, and I just was listening very carefully, and she said, "Whoa, this place is awesome." And it was just like, it made me so happy. And you could tell it was her first time. It was just a very she was completely enthralled with what we were doing. And so it makes me very happy. So I'm going to come back to one final comment, I guess.
Sure.
And not a comment, but you talked about Mr. Rogers, who is from the Pittsburgh area, from
That's right.
Latrobe. So from my neck of the woods originally. I'm from Pittsburgh originally. And we have this quote up, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but in the museum, and you've probably seen it, but he says something to the effect of, people often talk about play as if it's a break from learning. And he says that's totally wrong. Play is learning. And for a child, it is their job. It is the job of a child to play and to learn. And if you look at the work that he did for his life's work, I mean, it obviously is so in line with that philosophy, and how we ought to look at education. And so I'm really proud that, I think if you look at children's museums, not just ours, but it's tremendous. I mean, this movement that has occurred over the past several decades to give kids this opportunity to learn in an informal environment and build relationships and figure stuff out and work things out is incredible. So I'm glad to be a part of it, and I'm glad to be here today. Thanks.
Jeff, you're a great guy. The museum is awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. This was great. Everybody check out the Iowa Children's Museum online, or go there to the Coral Ridge Mall in Coralville, Iowa. We're right on the interstate, so if you're coming out from lots of different places, it's really easy to find. And
it's not that far from Cedar Rapids. That's my last soapbox.
That's right.
I love Cedar Rapids, but I sometimes get frustrated with this divide we have. Oh, I can't go to Cedar Rapids, or I can't go to Iowa City. It's like, come on, people, it's not that far. And we can go up to Cedar Rapids and do all the amazing things that are to do up there as well.
That's right. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you to everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.